I never thought I'd be raising another child at 44. My name is Diane Alden. I'm a mother of 2 grown children, Flora, my firstborn daughter, vibrant and fiercely independent at 25, and Martin, my son, thoughtful and stubborn in equal measure at 23. They'd both left home, more or less, stretching their wings in the student towns that swallowed them whole during internships and residencies. The house had become quieter, not empty. Lionel, my husband, still filled the halls with his warm presence. But the chaos of motherhood had settled into something more muted, almost nostalgic. And then came Jake. He wasn't mine. Not by blood, not originally. Jake was my brother Gordon's boy. A beautiful child, dark-haired, lean, with a guarded look in his eyes that made you want to wrap him in something soft. His mother, Ellie, died when he was little. Cancer, swift and cruel. I remember Ellie's hands, always cold, and how they shook when she asked me to keep an eye on her boys. But Gordon was never the same after her funeral. He unraveled, quietly at first. Too many beers after work, too much silence in a house once filled with love. Jake was only 6 when the bruises first showed up. I didn't say anything. Not then. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself children bruise. Boys climb trees. They fall. But the bruises continued. And Jake, sweet Jake, he never said a word. Not even when he'd visit us during weekends, sitting at our dinner table like a ghost trying to remember how to live among the living. We started having him more often, especially after Flora and Martin left for college. He was always polite, always helpful. He would stand by the sink and dry dishes beside me, never asking for much. And there was something in the way he watched me. Not inappropriately, God no, not then, but with a kind of aching hunger. Not for affection, not even for attention, but for safety, for something constant. Lionel took to him easily. That was one of the things I loved most about my husband. His ability to love without needing a reason. The kid's got good hands, he'd say, tossing Jake a wrench or asking for help moving the garden pots. Jake would beam, just a little, and my heart would twist. I never told Gordon about those early signs. I wasn't ready to fight him. I didn't think I had to. He was my brother. He loved his son. Didn't he? Jake was 13 the first time he stayed with us for the whole summer. I thought things might be improving. Gordon was sober for a while, or at least trying. He'd check in sometimes, quick phone calls, awkward updates. But by the time Jake turned 15, the truth started leaking through the cracks. He became quieter, heavier with secrets. And I was watching more closely. The day I saw the bruise, I was folding laundry. Jake had come in from mowing the lawn, shirt half stuck to his back with sweat. He reached for a glass of water, and as he leaned forward, I saw it. Purple and yellow, angry and blooming across his ribs. Jake, I asked quietly, what happened to your back? He froze. His hand trembled against the glass. And then, without looking at me, he said it. Dad, when he drinks. I sat down on the kitchen stool. My knees wouldn't hold me. That was the day something inside me shifted. Something maternal, but more dangerous. Protective, yes, but furious too. A kind of rage I hadn't known I could feel. Not even when my own children got hurt. Because Jake had been left behind. Forgotten. He wasn't a visitor in my life anymore. He was mine to fight for. I started the adoption process that same week. It was complicated because he was Gordon's, and because Gordon wasn't always willing to admit there was a problem. But the bruises helped. And Jake's confession, brave, clear-eyed, cut through the fog of red tape. By the time Jake turned 16, he was officially living with us. Flora and Martin embraced him like a sibling, and maybe because they had grown up alongside him in a way, it didn't feel strange. They called him Little Bro, even though he was catching up in height. They teased him, helped him with homework, dragged him into debates over movies and politics like any siblings would. And I adjusted too. I started thinking of myself as his mother. Not Aunt Diane. Just Mom. Only Jake never called me that. He always said Diane. Or sometimes just hey. And I didn't push. I told myself it didn't matter. But I think now, in retrospect, it was always going to matter. Because some part of him, some deep, private part, never wanted me to be his mother at all. He wanted something else. And I wasn't ready to see it. Not then. Not yet. Jake was 16 the day he moved in for good. The social worker handed me a clipboard with a final signature line, her voice practiced and kind. You're all set. If you need anything, counseling, school support, transitional therapy, we're here. I nodded, lips tight. Jake was waiting in the hallway with a small duffel bag slung over his shoulder. That was all he had from Gordon's house. Everything else, his childhood drawings, his trophies, the toy train set Ellie once gave him, he had left behind. Didn't feel like mine anymore, he had said when I asked. Flora was home that day from college. She and Martin had taken the news in stride, almost with a sense of relief. Finally, Martin had said, "It's about time someone did something." Flora hugged Jake with one of her long-armed, fierce embraces, like she was daring the world to try hurting him again. Lionel set up the spare room in the back of the house, close to the patio. "He needs his own space," he said, drilling in new curtain rods. "Somewhere that feels like a beginning." Jake didn't say much that first evening, but I remember what he did. He cleared the table without being asked. He walked slowly, as if afraid something might shatter. And that night, I heard him crying softly through the wall. I didn't knock. I sat with my back against the door and waited until I heard silence. In the months that followed, he began to shed pieces of his old life like winter layers. He grew taller, noticeably so, lean but strong, with dark hair that fell just above his lashes. He started running in the evenings, sometimes lifting weights with Lionel when he was home. They bonded in a way that surprised me, quiet and uncomplicated, like Lionel was teaching him how to be a man without ever having to say the word. But it was with me that Jake lingered. He followed me to the garden when I trimmed the roses. He sat on the counter while I made tea. He watched me with this attentiveness. Not invasive, not inappropriate, just present in a way that felt unusual for a boy his age. "Jake, you need a hobby," I'd joke. "Following me around is not a full-time job." "I like being where you are," he'd say, with a shrug and a half-smile. "You're easy to be around." I laughed it off. Back then I could. But things began to shift after Flora and Martin moved out. They left within a month of each other. Flora for her final year of med school in Boston, and Martin for an architecture internship in Colorado. The house felt hollow without their music, their arguments, their clumsy, affectionate chaos. Jake and I were alone more often than not. Lionel's job had him traveling, conference calls and long-haul flights that whisked him away for days at a time. It was during one of those quiet stretches that I began to notice the changes. Jake had grown into himself. His voice had dropped, his shoulders had broadened, and his gaze, it lingered longer than it used to. There was a softness to his compliments that made them feel like something more. "You look really nice in that dress," he said once, offhandedly, as I passed him in the hallway. "It suits your eyes." I turned, surprised. "Well, thank you." "You're welcome," he said with a slow smile. Then he went back to folding laundry. I dismissed it. Thought maybe he was just learning to be charming, trying to find his footing with girls. I told myself it was good. He was growing, healing, becoming someone who knew how to be kind. But I couldn't shake it. Then came the evening that changed everything. I had just finished my shower. Music was playing from my phone speaker. A jazz playlist I always returned to when I needed to feel soft again. The mirror was fogged. I stepped out to grab my towel. The bathroom door hadn't latched properly, and through the narrow crack, I saw a figure. Still quiet, watching. "Jake." He vanished the moment I turned. Just a flicker of movement down the hallway. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from something more tangled. Confusion. Disbelief. And beneath that, the smallest, sharpest flick of recognition. He had been looking at me not like a boy looks at a mother, but like a man looks at a woman. I stood for a long time, towel clutched to my chest, trying to slow my breath. The next day, I told myself I'd imagined it, that it was a trick of the steam and shadows. But that night, I knocked on his door. He opened it, and I saw the panic rise in his face before I even spoke. I stepped in, the towel still wrapped around me from my own indecisive pacing. I sat on the edge of his bed, crossed one leg over the other. His eyes flicked toward the motion. "Jake," I said gently, "you're not a little boy anymore. I know that. You're growing. Changing. And I know how confusing that can be. All the feelings, the wondering. I've seen the way you look at me lately." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I just want to help you understand what you're feeling. If there's anything you want to ask me, anything you don't understand, I want you to feel safe enough to ask." Jake looked at me then, not with fear or embarrassment, but with something deep and unraveled. "How do you make a woman like you notice you?" he asked, voice low. "Really notice you? Want you?" I didn't breathe. Then he added, "I gave myself bruises. Back when I was 15. Just so you'd think I needed saving. Because I thought if you brought me here, maybe you'd finally see me." My throat clenched. The truth, the raw, broken truth, was more than I'd expected. "You were always seen, Jake," I whispered, touching his cheek. "You were always wanted. You just didn't know it." He closed his eyes, leaned gently into my hand. "Then why does it feel like I still have to ask?" he said. And I didn't have an answer. I only knew I couldn't lie. After that night, something unnamed settled between Jake and me. It wasn't a confession. Not fully. It wasn't an act either. But it was a shift, like gravity tilting just slightly off-center. I slept in my bed that night. Alone. But I didn't sleep. My thoughts wouldn't quiet. I kept hearing Jake's voice. "Then why does it feel like I still have to ask?" Over and over. That raw vulnerability, the ache in his words, rattled through me like a bell I couldn't unring. By morning, the house was quiet, wrapped in the soft hush of routine. I moved through it like someone drifting underwater. Made coffee. Fed the cat. Put on a robe and sat at the kitchen bar, trying to ground myself in normalcy. Jake came down the stairs barefoot, wearing an old gray t-shirt, his dark hair still mussed from sleep. His eyes found mine the moment he entered the room, and the weight of that gaze stole the breath from my lungs. He moved slowly, carefully. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded, then shook my head. "I don't know." He came closer, but stopped at the other end of the kitchen island. "Did I scare you?" His voice was small, younger than the boy who stood before me. "No," I said. "You didn't scare me." "Then why did you run?" I looked at him, really looked, and what I saw wasn't just a teenager with a misplaced crush. It wasn't a boy acting out. It was something more complicated. A soul that had been bruised too many times, reaching for anything warm. For something that felt real. "I didn't run," I said softly. "I left because I needed to think." Jake moved around the counter slowly, his bare feet silent on the wood floor. He stopped when he was close, not touching me, but just there. I sat on the bar stool, wrapped in my robe, hands clenched around my coffee cup like it might save me. "I'm not your son," he said. "I know. We're not blood. Not anything really. Just people who lived in the same house long enough to start calling it family." My chest tightened. "You are family, Jake." He leaned closer, but still didn't touch me. "Not the way you mean. And not the way I want to be." I didn't move. I couldn't. Jake's voice dropped into a whisper. "I need to know. Do you see me, Diane? Or am I still that scared kid looking through a locked bathroom door?" I turned, and his body was inches from mine. My robe slipped slightly off one shoulder, and his eyes followed the movement, slowly, like watching a ripple in a pond. He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. Every nerve in my body was already lit. "I see you," I whispered. "More than I should. More than I want to." A silence fell over the room. And in that silence, Jake reached up and placed his hands lightly, reverently, on my shoulders. His thumbs brushed the collarbone beneath my robe. My heart slammed against my ribs, heat flooding my chest. "If you want," he whispered, "just say it." I couldn't speak. I didn't say yes. But I didn't say no. We didn't kiss. We didn't move beyond that delicate threshold. But when he asked me, with just a look, if I would stay with him that night, I said yes. Not out loud. Not with words. Just a breath. A pause. A surrender. We lay in his bed with our backs to each other, not touching. The silence was fragile, like a snowflake resting on a windowsill. And then, sometime around midnight, I felt him shift. Jake rolled over slowly, cautiously, and wrapped his arms around me from behind. Not possessive. Not eager. Just holding. Like he had been waiting years to feel safe. I let him, and we fell asleep like that, in the tangled dark. In the morning, I woke before him. The weight of his arms still across my waist, his breath warm against my back. I slipped out of bed gently, quietly, and padded down the stairs. The kitchen felt colder now. Brighter. More awake than I was ready for. I poured coffee, but I couldn't drink it. My body still carried the heat of his arms, and I hated myself for not hating it. Jake came down 10 minutes later. His hair damp, like he'd showered. His eyes softer than I'd ever seen them. There was a sadness there. A question. Maybe a fear. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a long moment, watching me. Then he said, "You're scared." I didn't answer. "You left because you're afraid this means something." I turned slowly. My voice caught. "I left because I'm afraid it means everything." He stepped forward, that same careful grace he always had, like he didn't want to spook me. Like I was something breakable. "I'm not your son," he said again. "Not really. And you're not my mother. You saved me, yes. But that doesn't make this wrong. Doesn't it?" I asked, eyes glassy. "We're not bound by blood," he whispered. "Only by the story we told ourselves so we'd feel safe. And I never felt safe until last night." He stepped closer, so close that I could feel his warmth behind me again. I didn't move. I couldn't. Not when my skin already knew the weight of his body, and my mind refused to let go of it. Jake leaned forward, gently pressing his chest to my back, his hands sliding up my arms. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. I closed my eyes and let myself feel the truth I'd been running from. I wanted him. Not the boy I had taken in, but the man he had become. That night, Lionel returned from his business trip. Late. Quiet. As always, he slipped into bed beside me, kissed the back of my shoulder, and whispered, "I missed you." But my heart was somewhere else. It was in a quiet bedroom down the hall, wrapped in warmth and confusion, in longing and danger. In Jake. I tried to convince myself it would pass. That what happened with Jake was an anomaly, some trick of vulnerability and misplaced affection. I told myself that we could retreat back to where we had been, to the safe, familial version of ourselves. That I could pretend I wasn't unraveling every time his hand brushed mine by accident. Or when I'd catch him watching me from the kitchen doorway, as if I was something sacred he wasn't allowed to touch. But pretending is exhausting. And Jake never pretended. He was quiet, yes. Respectful. He never crossed the line unless I hovered close enough to blur it myself. But he wasn't ashamed of what he felt. He didn't try to bury it. And that somehow was what undid me most. The next few weeks unfolded like a slow confession. Lionel was home, and everything returned to normal, but only on the surface. Jake was careful, always measured around my husband. Polite. Helpful. Nothing that would betray the truth hanging between us like smoke that never cleared. But my body betrayed me. Around Lionel, I flinched at his touch. The warmth we once shared had dulled. I knew he sensed it. He never said it outright, but he looked at me differently now, like a man watching a door close he hadn't realized was open. I avoided Jake during the day. But at night, in dreams, I was always walking toward him. Always reaching. And then Lionel left again. Another business trip. A week this time, maybe longer. He kissed my forehead at the airport and said, "Take care of the house." He meant it, as always, literally. But something in me heard more. And I knew I wouldn't be able to obey. It happened the third night he was gone. I had just finished showering when I walked down the hallway, towel wrapped around me, hair still wet. I heard the faint sound of running water in the hall bathroom, Jake's. The door was open, the steam curling out into the corridor. I didn't think. Or rather, I let myself not think. I stepped inside. Jake was at the sink, shirtless, shaving. His skin golden from summer sun, his frame lean and carved like something shaped slowly by time. I paused in the doorway, unsure whether to retreat or move closer. He saw me in the mirror. He didn't flinch. He didn't smile. He just looked, quiet and unmoved, like he had been waiting for this moment. "I didn't mean to interrupt," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He shook his head slowly. "You're not." He rinsed the blade and turned, still close enough that I could see the droplets tracing down his chest, catching in the hollow at his throat. I stepped closer, and he didn't move back. The bathroom shrank with our breath, with the weight of what we hadn't said in days. I looked up at him. "Jake," I whispered, but the rest of the sentence never came. He stepped forward, deliberate, careful, as if giving me time to stop it. I didn't. His hands didn't touch me, not at first. He waited for me to move. So I did. I reached out, touched the side of his face, ran my fingers through the still damp strands of hair at his temple. His eyes closed, and when they opened, the hunger in them was no longer shy. It was certain. "I've waited," he said, his voice rough, "for you to see me. For real." "I've seen nothing but you for weeks," I replied, even when I shouldn't. His hand rose, finally, to trace the towel along my collarbone. "I never stopped wanting this," he whispered. "Not from the moment you said I was safe." We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. Everything happened in quiet, stolen movements, an unwrapping, a surrender. It wasn't rushed. There was no urgency, only reverence, like he was memorizing something holy. Later, I sat on the edge of the tub, breath trembling, robe pulled loosely around my shoulders. Jake stood behind me, bare chest against my back, arms wrapped carefully around my waist like he still couldn't believe I was real. And I couldn't believe what we had become. The days that followed felt like living in a dream I wasn't sure I deserved. We didn't talk about what we were. There were no labels. Only soft touches, glances that lingered, moments stolen in the quiet corners of the house. And yet guilt walked beside me. Lionel called every evening, his voice warm and full of questions. I answered them all with rehearsed ease. But inside, something was breaking. Not because I didn't love him, I had. For years. But because now, in the silence after I hung up the phone, my heart waited for Jake's footsteps on the stairs. One morning, Lionel returned. I was in the kitchen when he came through the door. He dropped his suitcase, wrapped his arms around me, and said, "I missed you." But I felt nothing. No pull. No spark. Just the cold realization that my body no longer belonged to this moment. My mind was elsewhere. My heart was already lost. That night, Lionel lay beside me in bed. I pretended to sleep. When his hand brushed my arm, I resisted the instinct to pull away. But everything in me screamed to move. To run. Because I was no longer the woman he had said goodbye to a week ago. My soul now existed in those nights with Jake. In the bathroom. In the bed. In the small ways I had let go of everything I once believed sacred. It happened again the next time Lionel left. I didn't wait for Jake to come to me. I went to him. He was in the shower again, the door ajar, the sound of running water and quiet humming drifting out. I stepped inside without knocking. He turned, the steam rising around him like smoke, and when he saw me standing there, he smiled, not like a boy, but like a man who knew he had been chosen. And maybe that was the truth at the center of all this. That I had chosen him. Not because I was weak. Not because I was lonely. But because he had seen me through the grief, the structure, the mothering, the marriage. He had loved me not in spite of those things, but because of them. And in the warmth of his arms, in the curve of his mouth against my shoulder, I found a version of myself I thought I'd buried years ago. Young. Wanted. Alive. I know this can't last. I know it can't live in the light. But I also know I'll never forget the way he looked at me that night in the shower. Like fire. Like forgiveness. Like I was the only thing left in the world worth reaching for. Life demanded lines be redrawn, roles reclaimed. Jake left for college that fall. His acceptance letter a quiet salvation neither of us acknowledged aloud. I packed his things with steady hands and an aching heart. Lionel never found out. Or maybe he did, in the way some truths live unspoken between people who once loved each other deeply. I still think of Jake sometimes. In the quiet moments. When a song plays, or when the sun filters through the curtains just right. I remember the warmth of his arms, the question in his eyes. He was never mine to keep, only to hold for a moment that changed me. And maybe in another life, we would have been something different. But in this one, we were just a spark in the dark. Brief. Forbidden. Unforgettable.